Well, welcome to Unapologetically Queer with me, Al Ferguson. I am proud to talk to some of the most inspiring people in our LGBTQ plus community. And today is a great one. I'm so excited about this. We are joined by Erin Parisi. She is a mountaineer, wife, and stepmom, and she is trans. Her quest is to become the first trans person in the world to climb the highest peak on every continent on this planet, a goal known in mountaineering as the 7 Summits. She leaves for Alaska this week for her third attempt to climb Mount Denali and the highest peak in North America at 20,300 feet. Let's talk about her mountaineering dreams, the journey, the efforts to accomplish this incredible goal, and why is she doing it in the first place? And especially what we all can learn from this incredible struggle and the hardship added to that struggle because she is trans. Erin says she is passionate about humanity, ambitions, and the acceptance of trans people. And she shouts that literally from the top of our world. Everest is now in her sights. Welcome, Erin Parisi. You seem to me, first off, to be very unapologetically queer.
Yeah, it was a long journey to get there, but that's the goal, is that I shouldn't have to apologize for who I am, and I should be able to say who I am from any point that I can find to do that.
Yeah, I'm so excited for you to be with us. Before we get into it, I just want to say that so often the trans lens of storytelling that we tell at Queer News Tonight in propelling the trans community, and I as ally to the trans community, so much of that is focused on trans cannot do X or Y or Z. This is a lovely story, Erin Parisi's story, because it focuses on what trans can do. Do I have that right? It's what you can do.
Well, yeah, for sure. I think I told myself I couldn't do it my whole life. It was just transition. And then, yeah, I mean, once I got the courage to do that, it was really about how much can I do, and how much of the things I told myself I can't do, can I actually do and be happy while I'm doing it.
Yeah, our viewers are going to be shocked when we talk about all of the things that you can do. Before we talk about the climbing experience, let's talk about your journey to the trans experience. You said, quote, "I am visible to help destigmatize trans people," end quote. What did you mean when you said that?
Well, I think that the way that we have stigmatized the trans experience, and I don't think it's a secret at this point, is by not allowing trans people to own their own stories. So, we kind of get these like flyby stories about trans people, narratives, and they always seem to be like discrimination, death, ridicule, and somebody else defining our experiences. So, and I think along with that comes so much stigma just to be trans or to have a trans member of your community. So, I think that really is the first and most effective way that trans people have been held down over the years. I think that it's been effective, and I've wanted to crack that by doing something that was just a life goal and something that I dreamed of that transcended me being trans.
Great transition there. The communication of expressing the boundaries that you wanted to crack out of. You created a website. I've spent a lot of time in the last week on it. It's called Transcending 7, and your organization, Transcending. It is a nonprofit 501c3 dedicated to the advancement of transgender rights. You said, quote, "Transcending is dedicated to the advancement of transgender rights throughout all aspects of society by promoting athletics as a platform for transgender awareness and inclusion." End quote. Interesting to me, Erin, because trans sports seems to be a trigger button for so many people outside of our community of fear and really even ignorance. So you say this, and you create Transcending and Transcending 7 as a nonprofit for education. Tell me why you did that.
well, my goal was to help queer people find and trans people find joy in the outdoors and outdoor sports. So, I certainly do believe that trans people have a spot in sports, in the gender they identify as, even, in the elite sporting community. But, our stories of triumph and our stories of being proud in our bodies, I think sports kind of hits to that immediately. So really, there's so much that's offered through the outdoors, and, like you get a lifelong and lifetime of fitness, I think, comes together after we advance beyond kind of competitive sports, and we move on to the benefits of sports for lifelong healthy lifestyles, and that's really kind of where I've been trying to focus my efforts in outdoor inclusion.
I want to focus just for a minute more on the politics of what we're watching. Of course, we're broadcasting from Florida. We're almost ground zero in literally trans hate in our schools, in our healthcare, etc. More than 500 bills under consideration in 2023 against the LGBT community, and especially focusing on the trans community. Bathrooms, healthcare, hormone treatment, pronouns, you name it. What do you think from your seat? I understand your lens is sports and it's not overtly political, but from your seat, what do you see is going on, and what should we be all doing about it?
Well, I think when you look at all the laws, they are aimed at visibility. So, you can't be seen in public. You can't be seen in libraries. The book bans all revolve around seeing a positive narrative in books. I think, this all goes back to my stigmatization message. As far as, having kids in school and having kids to have rights in school, I think what people are really afraid of that are passing these laws is that the next generation will be accepting because they'll have known someone who's trans. So, in general, I think all of these laws, all 500 of them, are based on suppressing our existence and stigmatizing, and not only stigmatizing this generation of trans people, but every generation of trans people to come by treating them like we can't talk about them, we can't see them in society, we can't celebrate their victories, and we can't talk about their stories. So I think every one of those 500 rules comes down to a group of people who are afraid to even see another group of people. And humanize their stories. And
in humanizing the stories, you use the metaphor of sports. Your journal at transcending7.com. Everyone must go to Erin's website and read so much of the journaling that she has done in this experience. It's quite great. And in that transition of the anecdote, using sports to accomplish what you just said, you said something that I thought was very interesting. You said, quote, "Mountains have long served as a metaphoric and literal proving ground that individuals and communities face when overcoming a difficult path in forging pride and a community identity. We are seeking to share the same growth, both personally and as a community, through this mountainous endeavor." That to me is so interesting because it says loud and clear the challenge of going to the top of a mountain is similar to exactly what we're facing in America in facing these bills and even in the very existence of the trans community. You use that as a metaphor.
It's true. I mean, if you look at Everest itself, the story of Everest was climbed by a generation that was disenchanted and disenfranchised by World War I. And then again by World War II. And, these were kind of, younger European men who were going off to these far off places and trying to redefine themselves after seeing the horrors in war. And I think the world really related to those stories. They leaned on a population of people of color. They were the Nepalese people who were the most amazing climbers and remain the most amazing climbers in the world, who were by and large ignored I think in that whole struggle, but also a community who's gained a sense of identity and strength through mountaineering. And it took another 23 years, I think, after then. I think it was 1976, the year I was born, before a woman climbed Mount Everest. It took 23 years. So you see over and over again, I think by the time a Black woman did it, the year was 2003. Mountains have shown a difficult path to marginalized people historically, and all of those communities I've told you about, the people that have climbed those mountains, have created these great stories of inspiration for me, anyways. Where if you read about those stories and look at what was accomplished, and the sense of pride that they brought, and the sense of accomplishment, and the sense of growth they brought to their communities. I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal. And when I look at trans stories, and when I was growing up and looking for trans narratives to find, I just couldn't find those stories.
Yeah, excellent. You connect what you just said to mental health, and I've read a lot about what you've talked about and how transcending your website, your mission of climbing the 7 top peaks on all 7 continents. And I thought about what happened this month. A new survey this month showed how grim the mental health is for the trans community, especially for our youth. The survey found from the Trevor Project that nearly half of all trans youth have considered suicide this year. Half. Among this percentage of transgender and non-binary young people that receive gender-affirming medical care, nearly 2/3 of them are living in fear about losing access to this care. And then I read you say, quote, transcending 7 could improve transgender athletes' mental health, and that was a principal goal of what you were doing. Tell me about that in terms of how sports and your representation in climbing can help mental health of trans people, but especially our trans youth.
I think what you missed in the studies is that these are the outcomes for people that aren't supported or are living in environments where support is threatened. What we find time and time again in studies is that when trans people have a supportive person in their life, just one supportive person in their life, you revert the suicide statistics and the mental health statistics almost back to where the cisgender population is. So not only do we know that mental health is impacted by marginalization, stigmatization, and placing this burden on trans people, whether it be legislative or whether it be social. We know that supporting a trans kid creates the exact opposite effect and can return them to the same stats that everybody in society is facing. So. To me, again, the problem was when I was growing up and I looked at the narratives and I looked at the laws and I looked at the stories that were represented in the libraries. First off, the stories in the libraries, there just were none, right? The stories that I found when I went to libraries when I was a kid, and I did, were stories of medicalization where they would talk about kind of comorbidities of trans people and mental disease or criminality. And then, so everyone that I read about was a statistic, and how often a trans person was also, basically a criminal, right? And I think that was probably a product of, trans people trying to live and get through in the 80s when they didn't have support and society had kind of outcast us. And most of the other stories I read were about morbidity and being trans, how likely we were to die before other people. And that's hard. If you live under that pressure all the time, that's hard. So again, I think that Transcending's goal is to create a positive narrative so that when you go and you're alone at 2:00 in the morning, you feel like nobody supports you, or that there's nothing positive in the world, and you've fought, you've hidden from being trans, and really there's no one out there to support you, and you Google trans stories, you don't just find a list of death and discrimination and lack of housing and all these things that historically were associated with being trans, or find a bunch of clips of like Jerry Springer or things like that, you actually can find like positive stories, or somebody who can help, or somebody who's done it and found joy. I think finding those stories creates at least just one narrative that's positive, and the goal of transcending is not just to create my story or help facilitate my story. It's to help facilitate stories like mine. They're not stories that are negative or involve discrimination so much as growth and victory through just those endeavors.
Let's jump into that in a moment, of that positive story you're talking about. But before we do, I want to remind viewers, there are lifelines available for you. And as Erin just outlined, if you have issues, make sure you call the Suicide and Crisis 988 hotline, or you can text it. You can be anonymous, not calling, or we encourage you to contact the Trevor Project. They have all kinds of resources to help you, especially our trans community and our trans youth. Okay, Erin, let's talk about the 7 summits. This attempt takes on a goal never before accomplished: to climb to the top of the highest mountain on every continent. This was only completed for the first time just 38 years ago, and fewer than 500 people in all of history have accomplished it. About 400 of those that finished it are male, and about 100 are female, but it has never been accomplished by a trans person. What do you think about, Erin, that statement? It's never been accomplished by a trans person.
I don't know. Sometimes I laugh because it proves that we're underrepresented in sports, and it shows that these types of endeavors particularly become challenging for marginalized communities. So I think it flies in the face of a lot of the arguments that I think are made against me on a daily basis. One is that I'm not discriminated against for one reason or another. I hear that all the time. Like, how do I receive this? And here it is. You see this disparate outcome that's very clearly shown here. And I think a second one is people have grown so adept at talking about these couple of trans people that have ever participated in sports, but yet here we are, 500 people have summited the 7 summits. And not one yet has been trans. And I think that that's pretty reflective of what we see across sports, is that really trans people were never were never represented at the level that we exist in society, and still that's too much.
Yeah, Erin, and I'm really curious in terms of the way you just answered that question. 500 people in history have accomplished this goal. Imagine going to the top mountain on all 7 continents. Only 500 have accomplished that in all of history. 400 men, 100 women, not a single trans person. And when you say that in terms of what you just said, you're talking about the broad community, maybe even the LGBTQ community. But when I say no trans person has ever accomplished that, I'm curious what you think the trans community thinks about your goal.
I hear from people frequently that it's amazing and that they love it. I've gotten feedback from people around the world. I've gotten notes on Instagram, and I would say that I probably get 10 hate messages for every one that's positive, but it could be 100 to 1 and it wouldn't matter. That one message I get from Germany that somebody says, "I can't believe you're doing this. This is amazing. Thank you." I got a check from somebody that, I think it must have been maybe a month or 2 ago, that, it was this handwritten note, and the writing was just scribbled on this little note that said, "I read about your story," and I forget where, but you looked at it, it was just like, this person has basically, I don't want to paraphrase the note or say much more about it, but you looked at it and you're like, this person has not had this type of narrative their whole life, and they've looked for it, and they just wrote me a $20 check, and they're probably on a fixed income based on the information that they've given me in this letter, but they took the time to write that check. And those
Lovely.
little notes and those little things make me feel like I'm giving something back to the community. And
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of opportunity for me to do that, because there were a lot of people that have carved a place for me to be actually doing this right now. It took decades for this to be a reality to even think about.
And to that point, let's talk about how this is and will be accomplished. It's an interesting story. First, your first down under accomplishment was just at 7,310 feet. You write about it in your personal journal like, I took a day jaunt up to the top in Australia to Mount Kosciuszko. Did I pronounce that right?
Kosciuszko.
Yes, okay, thank you. What you said.
That's okay. Let's call it Kosi.
Let's be clear. Therefore, you've conquered Australia in February of 28. But what's even more interesting is that just the year before, in 2017, you were in full transition with major facial reconstruction and larynx reconstruction surgeries. You said from and in your diary journal, quote, "By January 2018, my confidence had returned, but I wasn't sure yet about my strength or endurance. Still scared by the challenges of the world, I applied for a passport and received my first travel document ever with a giant F in the sex demarcation, and it was finally in my name. I rented an outlandishly decorated, though cheap, camper van in Sydney and headed south to the snowy mountains of Australia," end quote. Now let me get this sure and make sure I understand. You had your own Priscilla, Queen of the Desert moment to launch the seven mountains of the world. Is that right?
I guess, yeah, that's absolute. I guess I wasn't a convertible, but yeah, I got to sleep on top of it because it had a little deck on the top, and so it was as close to a convertible as I needed.
And after you got started into I believe New South Wales is where the mountain is, you said what happened after the climb was what was so special to you. You said, quote, "After I finished my peak, I moved on to living in anonymity I hadn't known for months in the small, blue-collar rural towns I passed through without notice or incident, and felt the peace of the mountains, the ocean, and the Shiraz-bearing countryside," end quote. Well, first off, good taste for Australian red wine. But I'm curious, when you wrote that, and that moment, that kind of honeymoon moment you had after a significant surgery transition, is that what the trans community really wants, is just to live in community, maybe even unnoticed? Is that what was your point there of what your time in these small rural towns after that first climb? What was the point of what you were saying there?
I think trans joy is really the part of my story I probably should talk about more often, because I think, this was about, after probably the toughest couple of years of my life, after having to come out to so many people over and over again, after being outed to my friends, after losing family members, after, picking up this whole second, chosen family, all of these things I went through. Just to breathe a sigh of relief and say, I made it here, and just to find just the joy, not in a victory over some battle, but a joy and in just relief that I was just able to find my way around and celebrate in a manifestation of me that I was comfortable expressing myself in. That was really the takeaway, I think, after the mountain, was you have happiness in your future because there's joy in your future.
You say the phrase trans joy. I have, in my experience with Queer News Tonight, I've met and learned from so many trans people. When you say trans joy, were you aware when you were doing this in Australia after that first climb that you were experiencing something that is so rare in the trans community? To have that moment of sigh of relief, ecstasy, I'm here now. Were you aware of it at that moment, or it was just something you were living?
I don't think it was something that I was mining for. I didn't realize that I would find what I was going to find or what I would find. But I certainly, you know it when you find it. So
Yeah.
I don't think it's it's not what I knew that I had set out for, and yet there it was, and kind of it's like warm and like tender glory.
And for me, Erin, that's the really beautiful thing about this story is, yes, of course, the notoriety, you're going to make world news when the Everest moment comes, and that's coming. But that really isn't the greatest part of the story. The greatest part of the story is what you're saying, that started in the little tiny 7,000 feet peak in Australia at the moment for you. In my opinion, that's what I see. Your next climb is more ambitious. The 19,341 foot to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro. You conquered Africa in March of 2018. And something interesting on this. Africa is dangerous for LGBTQ, especially trans. You said from your daily journal the following, quote, I was struck by the reality that Tanzania wasn't known as an LGBTQ friendly destination, nor was Africa by and large. As proof, Tanzania still had a law on the books that provided for intense fines and a 30-year prison sentence for anyone convicted in court of being in a same-sex and male relationship. And while women in same-sex relationships faced only 5 years as a possible prison sentence, rape was known to have been used as a deranged form of conversion therapy for those thought to be a lesbian. When I go on and read the thought of the irony of your climb at Kilimanjaro in Africa, the irony of being a trans woman, but especially your achievement in Africa, watching the sunrise on the rooftop of Africa, it was on International Women's Day. It's incredible irony, right? As a trans person, safety must have been front and center for you. How did you have the fortitude to continue on with what you faced?
Well, the fact that it was on International Women's Day was completely a coincidence. You know, I had gotten there. I'd gone there once in 2012, and I went back. And I had searched out the same resources I had gone with the first time I went. And I was lucky enough to have found them, but my trip didn't go as planned. So I got I had several delays. So I was kind of sitting in a hotel in Arusha as we pieced together through the delays and got a team together that could do it. And I went up there solo. And while I was doing that, you know, I certainly was aware that I was alone in a place where certainly if not vigilante justice, that the court system was geared against me if something went wrong. And
it was crossing your mind that was a possibility.
I wasn't really working with that much of a safety net, you know, being there alone.
I want to give an example.
Changes things.
I want to give an example of that I think is so interesting. Again, from your diary journal. And I remind everybody, you want to go to the website. There is so much incredible written. You wrote on this experience in Tanzania and Mount Kilimanjaro, quote, I knew I needed to be stealth in entering Africa in order to assure my own safety. The problem was the African tour providers remembered me, and Erin just referenced it, in my former life 10 years earlier as Erin, A-R-O-N, and remembered my name, and I couldn't reasonably explain my transition as I didn't want to negatively affect my chances of survival as I proceeded on my quest to the summit, Kilimanjaro. I informed my tour provider that I, Erin, E-R-I-N, was the cousin of his former client, Aaron, A-R-O-N, and that my cousin had directed me to him, and it worked, end quote. You climbed Kilimanjaro, but it is a story every trans person understands in their daily life, to reinvent for survival. I've got this correct, that's what happened in terms of how you made this jaunt to Kilimanjaro possible?
Yeah, I had the email address of the person I climbed it with, 10 years earlier. So, or whatever it was, 6 years earlier. So I reached out because I didn't have the money to just go on a big tour, and it probably would have been the safer thing. And looking back on it, it was probably it would have been the wiser choice. But I didn't have the funding, and I was feeling good, and I felt like this was a goal I wanted to take on. And, so I emailed him and said, "Hey, with my new email address," and I said, "Hey, my cousin, who you climbed with 12 years or 10, 6 years ago, sorry, 6 years ago, um, had gave me your name, and this was my cousin's name." And I got an email back a day or two later that said, "Yes, I definitely remember your cousin," and then it's mentioned a couple of details about me, and told me to tell myself hi. So at that point, I'm like, all right, well, that's good and bad news. One is I've got my go-to contact. I've got boots on the ground, but on the other hand, like I'm having to make this pivot that I'm going to go in there and with somebody who actually kind of remembers me from before and lives in a country that, by and large, I have indications is transphobic.
Yeah, amazing story to me. But it's just getting started. 2 down. Your next climb is even more dangerous. The 18,510 foot of the summit of Mount Elbrus. You conquered Europe in June of 2018. Russia could have been catastrophic, which is where the mountain is. You said from your diary journal, quote, "I found myself alone and trans in a remote part of Russia known for its intolerance against the LGBT community. No one spoke a word of English. The U.S. consulate warned travelers against climbing Mount Elbrus over foreign hostage-taking and well-documented practice of extrajudicial killings of gay men. I spent the next week with my head down and my eyes up, motivated by the resolution that I never wanted to return. In those brief days, I realized the joy of integrating as myself as a climbing team and made several friends from across the globe," end quote. Erin, Russia. Putin says LGBTQ people don't exist in that country. Trans people are an abomination. What were you thinking? I know you have to do it to accomplish the seven summits, but my goodness, what were you thinking while you were doing that?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I saw that was problematic it was two things. I think in 2016 we had the Sochi Olympics, and you saw a lot of protesters go out, and they were met with force and were basically suppressed. And then secondly was the extrajudicial killings of gay men in Chechnya at the time. There was a big purge, and it was well known that there were kind of paramilitary forces that were finding, I think gay men by and large, and they would go through their phones. They'd find one person, get their phone, and then go through and kind of figure out their contacts. And then they were taking out like these swaths of people that often just to find love were living under, assumed identities, and just having like a single first name and a phone or something else just to avoid persecution. And if you look back at the news at the time, there was a lot of that. I woke up, I was there during the World Cup, and I woke up the day the World Cup started, and I was actually at that point in Minvod, which is the city you fly into to kind of as the launch point for Elbrus. And the U.S. State Department had doubled down, saying, we recommend no U.S. nationals go to Mount Elbrus, given a increased likelihood of attacks on tourists and travelers based on the World Cup starting and the amount of attention that this venue provides. So, I don't know what I was thinking in that case. I know I had the trans flag in my backpack, so I was going to hold it on top of Mount Elbrus, but instead, when I get to the top, I made a decision to kind of throw that little T symbol up there, and just that's my little rebellion in Russia. People were serving 2 years in, 2 weeks in prison if they showed the trans or the the rainbow flag in any way. That was like the punishment. I knew I would die in a Russian prison the day I went in. So I threw up that little T, and T is for trans rights. And that was as good as I could do. I couldn't hold the trans flag up there.
Yeah,
but rest assured, I existed. I existed in Russia, and I exist today.
Yeah, absolutely. You survived it, and you got to the third summit. And by the way, Erin, you know, I'm good on the calendar. And I understand, 365 days in a year. I look at the first three, and you accomplished 3 summits in approximately 5-ish or so months, but within a year. What in the hell were you thinking of to do the first 3 of this challenge in a single year? What was going on in your mind there?
Well, it gets better because I got 4 in a year, but I had a bunch of frequent flyer miles, and I felt strong for the first time, and in a long time I felt happy, and I felt resilient, and nothing was going to stop me. So I don't know. I felt like I could, and there were no reasons I could think of that I couldn't. So why wouldn't I?
All right. So your next climb is your highest to date, the 22,383 foot summit of Mount Aconcagua. I always have trouble.
Aconcagua.
Yes, I've actually been to base there in Chile. And you conquered South America in February of 2019. Interesting here is you got very personal. You said in your diary journal, quote, having spent significant travels in Peru, Argentina, Patagonia, and Chile, the thought of climbing high into the Andes gives me chills. I also have family in Buenos Aires who have been extremely supportive of my journey. I hope to raise a glass of Malbec with them after finishing to celebrate seeing the top of South America. Interesting to me, honestly, that you focus on something that I think is an interesting story in your journals and this experience. First, your love of red wine, and that climbing is a team. A person, a people, a community endeavor and celebration. And that comes out in this climb in South America, that you learn the appreciation of people around you and the support system that you have around you. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, climbing, I think in general, there's a lot of soloists out there, but my story isn't the story of a soloist. There's a lot of great, soloist stories. We've all seen those narratives, but no, mine is done as a community effort, and I think that just as sweet of a piece of it is working on a team. Hoisting, being on the rope team together, knowing that my life is in the hands of somebody else that it values my life, and socially it's the same thing. I do this with the support of my family. I do this with my friends, and I do it with all the people who have helped, raise the money and raise the or put the effort into holding the events where we make it happen to put me on these mountains. And, at any given time, it's sad when I lose somebody, and it was sad when I came out to lose somebody. And I think everyone who's come out or not lived the world's narrative of themselves and decided to manifest who they are has figured out that there are some people that are behind them conditionally. But when you find those people that are behind you without condition and support you, these mountains again become metaphors for what you can actually do. Like the mountaintops you can climb if you have the support of a team. So my cousins in Argentina were a great example of that. And they're just amazing. I love them to death.
I think it's a wonderful story for the trans community too, because it's an indication that you have friends and you have family and you have adopted family, and whoever supports you are really critical to the success of the trans joy you're looking for, which is what I just heard you say. Your next climb is the most remote. Now, all of the experiences you've had so far, now it really gets real. The 16,050 foot summit of Mount Vincent Massif. You conquered Antarctica in February 2022. And to me, this was another interesting moment. The lonely trek to the top of the bottom of the world, literally, gay joke, insert here. You said from your diary journal, quote, I have a curiosity and fearful apprehension envisioning the cold, unpopulated expanses of Antarctica, the windswept, high altitude and desolate expanses with Antarctica will provide the harshest environment I will ever face. I only imagine it will be the closest to visiting another planet that I will ever face. Now, very rare. Tell us what your experience of Antarctica was for you.
It was extraordinarily tough logistics. So I'm finding my way from Colorado to Antarctica, and it's basically 2 continents away. And I don't know if there's ever another chance that I would have to be 2 continents from my home continent. So you've got to go through all these small towns and airports and meet different people. And it was all during the time of COVID. So, getting onto Antarctica, because it was pretty well sealed off its space, was extraordinarily difficult as far as just logistics through COVID go. We all know what travel looked like during COVID, and here I am getting to Antarctica. So I get down there, and it's interesting because we're all in the same struggle together. We are an encapsulated team, but we are a team, and we're all going through kind of the soul draining cold and like the weather, and we've got all these, you get the down days because the wind is blowing too hard, or the weather is just not right to travel, or it's too cold to walk. But you can always laugh as a team. So really, again, you're having to find success as a teammate and as somebody who's just part of the greater joy of mountaineering, and that was awesome.
You were able to fly the trans flag at the top of Massive?
Yeah. Up until then, I guess the trans flag had been down to the polar research stations a few times, but I'd never seen it on top of a mountain there. So I just grabbed those trans colors. You see them right there, blue, pink, and white. And a sponsor had made that banner for me with the trans flag kind of prominent in the middle of it. And Mount Vinson
I know at this point this has, if production could keep on that picture, please. Let's look at it again. And a side by side with Erin. So you're looking at this picture at the top of the bottom of the world. Again, we make the joke in Antarctica, LGBT joke. But trans people all over the world are going to be watching you right now, listening to you right now, and looking at that picture. I know it's old hat for you, but you can't look at your face right now and that picture and think, oh my goodness, the representation for your community, the trans community, what that moment must be like for so many people that are looking at this right now.
Yeah, you can't get the message out when you do it. So I knew about it for a week or 2 weeks before I could actually get to a place where I had internet to send that picture out. And then I put this Instagram post up, and all of a sudden I start getting like all of these news articles and requests for like reporters to speak with me, and there's articles being written in languages and with letters I didn't know because they weren't like standard letters that I knew. I'd seen it in Asian languages, and I'd seen it in Middle Eastern languages, and I'd seen it blew my mind. And then there was a video game called Celeste, I forget. But it was a trans climber who had climbed to the top of the mountain, and people started bombarding me with like pictures of this climber and telling me like, this is this person. I had to do all this research to figure out who this even was. It was really surreal to be kind of at the end of the earth, like the last place I think I could probably have gotten an internet signal, and be like, seeing this message start to just spread around and start getting all of these messages back about people saying thank you, and talking about like in their conversations on Reddit or Instagram or wherever it was, like, this is this big moment. And I was just like, I still have frostbite from that, and I don't know that I could send out a video. And
to that point, Erin, I'm looking at that picture and looking at that person in the eyes. You've still got to climb down the mountain, which is going to take incredible time, and 7 days before anyone in the world's even going to know that this has happened. When you were holding that flag at the top of the mountain of Massive in Antarctica, was it washing over you, the significance of that moment? Were you realizing what was happening at that moment?
I think it was it was a personal celebration. I started dancing around and I started yelling like, "We've got a trans summit of the highest peak on Antarctica. We got this awesome like summit in Antarctica." And then I realized I'd never come out to my team until that moment. So I'm on the top of Antarctica in the most remote place I could probably ever be on Earth. And I'm coming out to a group of 12 or 15 strangers. And it's that point when I'm just like, all right, well, I got 7 days with strangers. I don't know how they feel about the trans population because, statistically, we know that there's a certain percentage of people that just don't accept trans people at all. And at the same time, and so I'm a little bit afraid, but at the other side of it, like, it's just joy. I was just like, that was it. We have a trans ascent of this highest mountain in Antarctica. Like, how long did it take me to like get here and raise the money and like get through COVID and do all of the things to put a trans person on top of the highest point in this most remote place on Earth?
I can hear the emotion in your voice. 5 down, 7 summits in the world, 7 continents, 5 down, accomplished. Your next climb to date is going to be your hardest, if the indication of the number of tries is any indication. The 2,310-foot summit of Mount Denali. You're leaving this week for this climb. You will try to conquer North America starting this week. Erin, I want to say I especially appreciate this attempt that you're going to make this week. And the reason is because I have explored and know Alaska as North America's last frontier so well. I've been to Alaska more than 30 times. I have been to the top of the mountain that you've climbed, or you will climb this time. Then when I went, it was called Mount McKinley, but oh, by the way, I did it by private helicopter. It's slightly different than what Erin does. I have driven the haul road to Prudhoe Bay and the Arctic Ocean. I've been to the Arctic Native Village in Kotzebue, to the end of the Iditarod in Nome, and have ridden a sled dog team there. I've been to every national park in Alaska, including Katmai, to see the largest concentration of grizzlies gather in the world, to stand in the waterfalls in the fall while salmon literally jump into their mouths. I've been to Denali so many times, and so therefore I have a unique understanding of what I'm getting ready to say, of how remote Denali is, how rugged it is, how dangerous it is, and the most dangerous of all of the Alaska wilds. So after 2 attempts, and I understand you've tried this twice, you go this week for your 3rd attempt in the climb. It will be number 6 of your 7 summits of the 7 continents of the world. Why are you trying a 3rd time?
Because sometimes things don't go your way and you don't always climb the mountain the first time. And when you don't, there's always a lesson to be learned, and you can get back up and you can walk away with the lesson and you've still won, or you can get back up and try again. And in my case, you can learn another lesson and you can get back up and try a 3rd time. And yeah, that's where I'm at.
You learn from it. The trans community has repeated challenges and perhaps even failures. What would you say to them about this week's 3rd attempt to conquer North America? You're talking to the trans community and saying, hey, look, all of this success, Antarctica is now in my rearview mirror, and I didn't accomplish it twice, and I leave this week for a 3rd attempt. What would you say to the trans community?
I think that there's resilient people don't need to hear how strong and resilient they are. And, trans kids don't deserve to have to be resilient and be strong. They have to deserve to live their lives. And I would say to trans people, like, whether I get up to the top of this mountain or not, it's not, it's a personal journey, and we learn from it. But it's not. This isn't like. I guess it's not metaphoric of what I've experienced, I think, as a trans person, as far as like everything else goes. I think really we have to remember that there's joy in our lives to be focused on, and I think that there's joy in my life to be being on an expedition team, and it's not about the summit, and there's not a moment that marks victory on my expeditions or anything else. I think. We shouldn't have to be forced to be resilient in this day and age, and here we are under all these attacks, and I don't have much more to say for that. I hope I can bring home the highest summit, if that brings joy to people in a time when we're just being disparaged and being told we deserve to be eradicated. Then so be it. But my message is that we're here, we're always here, and we're here whether we stand on mountains or whether we're told that we're resilient or our strength is recognized or not. And that's just the truth of the matter.
Erin, help all of us that don't understand the climbing process. The other thing of you leaving this week for Mount Denali, it's so hard for me, by the way, because I'm ingrained to call it McKinley. And from your jaunt from Talkeetna, the very famous roadhouse there, is the success of getting to the top? If you're not able to accomplish it this time, is it something that you'll do again? There'll be a fourth attempt?
I think so. I think through my life, I'll probably do it again. I think that visibility, like no trans person needs to be visible to be real. And that goes for me too. I think, my next attempt might come 3 or 4 months or years down the road, not months, years. I might go to Everest instead. There's a lot of options, I think, as a mountaineer. I think that there's other things I need to focus on too. I have a 12-year-old or an 11-year-old stepdaughter, and I have a wife, and I spend a lot of time training, and I've spent a lot of time training for the last 5 years since 2018, and I would like to spend a lot of time watching my daughter grow up. I'd like to spend a lot of time traveling with them. So, there might be a fourth time, and it might be next year, but hopefully, like my focus is like, let's get to the top of this mountain.
Yeah, you're going to get to the top of the mountain. And I don't even say that from the standpoint of this isn't going to happen, because I have great confidence it is. We're going to be watching you over the next weeks. Once you start from Talkeetna, approximately what's your plan in terms of to the top? How long will that take?
It takes about 3 weeks. So if I leave on Thursday, I will be in Talkeetna on Saturday, and the mountain doesn't always cooperate. So you got to fly a small twin-engine plane in, and a little de Havilland Sea Otter. You fly in, and weather has to be right for that. So once you get to that point, it takes probably, in a good expedition, I think a comfortable amount of time would be 17 days.
Yeah, so we're looking at estimates where we're really going to look closely in terms of reporting. I know communication is difficult, but we're going to look at reporting around the 15th to the 20th as a reasonable window in the month of June. Now let's see, does anything else important happen in the month of June? Oh yeah. What do you think about the timing of you getting number 6 and to the top of North America in Pride Month, when we're celebrating the LGBTQ community, and we will be celebrating this gigantic trans achievement? What do you think about the timing there?
I'm grateful to have a chance. It's a long way to go from, the bricks that were thrown at Stonewall to, my opportunity to get on a plane and go to the top of North America. So, to sit here, I think it's 53 or 54 years later, and be able to say, like, I'm not fighting for my rights in the street. I'm like going for pride because of the people that helped and fought before me, is a position of gratitude that I will never be able to repay.
Yeah. And Erin, on this journey to get to the mount, to the top of Mount Denali, are you going to be carrying flags with you?
I am.
And what are you going to be
I had
carrying?
a flag that was signed by Monica Helms, who designed the trans flag. She she's autographed it. It was in my backpack when I got to the top of Antarctica. She had given it to me, gosh, right after I finished Aconcagua, so I haven't had it that long. But we have gotten it to the top of Denali last year for Pride. We were able to lift the trans flag to the top. I had to leave the mountain with COVID. About 12 days into my expedition, but my team carried on. They were wonderful allies. They were perfectly welcoming the time I was with them, and they carried the flag to the top and displayed it for us. But this year it's going to be me holding up Monica's flag and on the top of Denali, and I'm hoping it's right around the time of Denver Pride, because Denver Pride usually happens on Father's Day. So
exactly.
Hopefully I'll have a chance to just kind of hold that up there.
And you tell that story of your team helping to get it to the top because you got COVID in the middle of attempt number 2. I can see just the tingling that of even telling that story. It's going to be a big achievement in the middle of Pride Month, and we wish you all the luck on that. But we're not done. Just a minute more to say, and now there is the top of the world. No word brings greater fear or greater reward than the word Everest. 29,050 feet. Tell me about the possibility from your perspective of being the first person to complete the 7 summits with the crown jewel of Mount Everest in that.
Well, Mount Everest is one mountain where I did find some trans inspiration growing up. Edmund Hillary had a media runner on his team named Jan Morris. She at the time hadn't transitioned and went by her dead name, but she was the person that got the message back to England in time for Queen Elizabeth's coronation. And I think it's a story that's by and large been ignored by society because, again, it challenges the narrative that we've handed to trans people. So to put a trans person on Everest, to me, is just... It's coming full circle on this opportunity, and it becomes the first known trans person to make it to the top, and to be reborn in that narrative. That was one of the only narratives I could find, was Jan Morris's story of Edmund Hillary's expedition and Tenzing Norgay's expedition. Is again one of those opportunities where you realize it's kind of like pinch me, like I'm not only living like such a happy life, but I'm allowed to like pursue like this goal that in history is just to me just so incredible, and just to be a small like echo of it.
The pinch me moment is for everyone, because I remind viewers that we're not talking about a goal that doesn't have gigantic and significant risk. I want to point out more than 210 people have died in the attempt to climb Mount Everest. Erin, I'm curious, when I say that and the history of great reward, great risk, does that wash over you of that possibility? Have you ever even considered it? If I do Everest, there's that possibility. Or whenever you've done any of these achievements, there is that possibility. Do you consider that?
On the way into Aconcagua, you pass a graveyard. That's all people that have died on Aconcagua. And there's plenty of stories on Denali and most of the other mountains as well. I think in climbing we focus not on the giant drop off beneath us, but on the sturdy footing that we can find kind of above us. And so no, I guess the short answer is I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the deaths on Denali. I think about kind of the progress and that next step, that next safe step.
Yeah, and certainly makes you who you are. But I do want to ask another question. If that tragedy did happen, what would you want the world to remember about you, Erin?
I think the biggest thing is just that, like if I have died following my dreams, then I had a chance to follow my dreams. When a trans person is killed in the streets just trying to be themselves, that person again also just died following their dreams, and again I would have put myself into the situation where that was a reality. And there's a lot of trans people that die and they don't have that chance. They are literally just being themselves and facing death. When I look at the death zone on Everest, and when I've looked at it through my story, it's always been kind of metaphoric because it's like I can travel around the world, but I got beat up in my own neighborhood. So I think, death is a reality for a lot of trans people a lot of the time. I try not to focus on it again. I try to focus on the positives and the goals and the next step forward. But the reality is that when I started climbing, I was very much stepping into the world and trying to find a safe space, in a space that I could grow. And here at home, a lot of the time I feel like I'm really just trying to exist, and a lot of us are dying just for trying to exist.
Yeah, beautifully said. And it makes me, as you talk about how the trans community fights in the similar way, what would you want your trans siblings to say about you in the unlikely event that that would happen?
I think the biggest compliment to me is when people just send me a note saying I'm inspired enough that I got my passport and I'm ready to travel the world. I hope that the only thing they say about me is that this inspired, this inspired me or made me see that it was possible to get on a plane, to face that TSA line, to go to that country that I didn't think might be safe, to come out, to find a friend, to take whatever risk it was, to manifest yourself and be happy in life. And if somebody says that my story gave them that, then it was a success. And I think just one person saying that makes it a success.
Yes, and I suspect many more than one person will be saying that. We're going to watch you in these coming weeks. Very exciting as you leave this week for Alaska and Mount Denali. I remind everybody, make sure you follow Erin Parisi. You should absolutely, so many of the quotes that I gave from her personal journal, you can read much, much more at transcending7.com. You can see a variety of merchandise. By the way, Erin would appreciate your support in helping make this endeavor possible. There's a cool t-shirt, for example, that I am going to order, and especially read her journal. I want to finish with Erin as she leaves this week for the 6th peak. Attempted twice before means nothing is guaranteed. North America's Mount Denali. I was inspired by something you said in your journal, and I want to read it. Quote, "We are also sharing a positive narrative of what it means to be trans and reverse a long-held misconception that being transgender should be a detriment to personal growth. We will boldly proclaim from the highest points on every continent that we are proud and we are able and we will hide no longer." End quote. Erin, powerful, powerful words.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erin Parisi. We'll follow you closely. We're excited to watch the journey. Everyone in LGBT America and the world will be cheering you on. And thank you so much for joining us at Queer News Tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.